Thanks everybody joining tonight. My name is Mark Doolin. I'm a trumpet player in Atlanta, Georgia, and I'm doing one of the Zoom chats we've been doing for the past month here. And my guest tonight is Michael Mergen. Dr. Mergen is the new professor of trumpet at the University of Cincinnati College Conservatory Music, and just recently left the Marine Band after 21 years. Did his undergraduate at the University of Michigan, and studied with Armando Gatala and Charles Duvall, and did a master's degree at the Eastman School of Music with Charlie Geyer. So, Michael, welcome. It's good to see you.
Yeah, thank you for having me. What an honor to be here.
Oh
Good to
well,
see you.
I'm so glad you're here. And you and I've been friends for now about what 15 years, I would say. It's
Right.
about right.
That sounds right.
And when I was teaching at Winthrop University, the Marine Band Brass Quintet came in and were guests on a trumpet day we had there. And so I've always loved Michael's playing and been a big fan of him as a person and a player, and super happy as an alumnus of Cincinnati that he is going to be joining the faculty there. So it'll be a really great situation. Um, so one of the things we were trying to do with these a lot is talk about your early time. And so you said you grew up in New Jersey. Can you kind of talk about when you started playing trumpet and the early days of that?
Absolutely. Yes, I started playing trumpet just in elementary school band. When it came time to choose an instrument, I simply did exactly what my older brother was doing, who was a trumpet player also. And so I signed up to be a trumpet player, and we were really fortunate at the elementary school to have a tremendous band director who I'm still in touch with. He's retired now. He lives in Hawaii with his wife, and he is also a trumpet player and was very, very enthusiastic. And I'm one of four children, so all four of us learned how to play musical instruments from him. And he was a huge supporter of everybody. And he was one of those band directors where you meet early in your life, and he gave as much as he could. He came in early and he created what he called a stage band, jazz band for us. And just a lot of opportunities to perform in as many different ways as possible, pit orchestra, that kind of thing. And then at a certain point, he decided he wanted to go back and take lessons again. And I had been taking some lessons with him on the side, and he said, I think you should come with me and study with the same person." So we both would go once a week to take lessons in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, with a man named Larry Wright, who's teaches at Moravian College, played in a lot of different orchestras out there, still lives out there, still teaches out there, still performs. Was a member of the Philadelphia Brass for a long time, and just also it's a significant influence. So that's how I got started. Yeah, I was really fortunate to meet Gary. Mhm.
Wow, so that's amazing. Your band director was taking lessons at the same time when you guys were driving out to this other place to take lessons. Wow. Were you guys in
Yeah.
each other's lessons, kind of watching what was going on, and or was it like,
Uh,
yeah,
the feed interrupted. Can you repeat the question,
sure,
please?
sure.
Yeah.
Were you guys like in the same room while each other was having a lesson? Was it like we
It
watching
was
him?
simultaneous lesson, or I had my lesson right after his every week. So we drive out together and we, talk about things on the way out, and then talk about our lessons on the way back. And then my folks would come pick me up from his house, when we got back to New Jersey. It's not that far. It's maybe 35 or 40-minute drive from where I grew up. But so, Gary Ross was the trumpet player. He went to Towson University back in the 70s. He grew up in New Jersey, went to Towson University, and so he had a lot of wonderful information to share with me about Hank Levy and Maynard Ferguson and Al Hurt, a lot of really wonderful trumpet players, and so then he wanted other skills. That's why he went to study with Larry Wright again. And so the conversations feel like they could have gone on forever. And like I said, we're still in touch. A few years ago, when he was downsizing, getting ready to move to Hawaii, he gave me his entire record collection, which was
Wow.
fascinating. A lot of things, a lot of Maynard Ferguson records, and Stan Kenton, and things I'd never seen or heard of. And so it's been fun to go through them.
Is that
To
what you
listen
were
to.
hearing in the beginning? Was that what you were listening to?
Absolutely. Yeah, I definitely, because we played Birdland in elementary school jazz band, and those
Right.
those kind of tunes, and Watermelon Man, and that was really fun, and that's what I wanted to do. And he said, in his opinion, he felt like I would be set up for more success if I worked on other things in my playing, more of the classical things from another person. And he felt like he didn't have as much to offer me as a teacher at a certain point. So that's why he suggested I go back and take lessons. The lessons with Larry then took off, and I didn't get back to doing as much of that early playing in that genre as I had thought I would had intended to do. So
So what kind of stuff were you working on with Larry? Was it Arbin, Clark, Schlossberg, those kind of things?
yes, he had. I still have all my notes and everything, handwritten notes that he would, a very very balanced diet of a lot of Arbins and the colon flexibility studies, everything you mentioned. And he was very attentive. I mentioned that he had studied with William Bacchiano for one of his degrees. And so it was basically, here are things that I think you should be set up and prepared to do to go to school, learn how to be a professional musician. We worked on some solfege things. We worked a lot on transposition, and he was the one who taught me how to transpose by clef, things like that. So we did a lot of very different, varied things.
Yeah.
So
Wow. So you had pretty good transposition coming out of high school then.
yes,
And
yeah,
so
absolutely.
do you still do transposition via clef?
I think so. I had a conversation with Chris Gecker a bunch of years ago where he said, you can go this direction or that direction. And ultimately we end up just transposing however we end up transposing it. It could
Right.
be from whether you're legitimately reading the clef or you're doing a combination of that or interval or whatever. So I think, yes, I still approach it by thinking of it in a clef. Ultimately, it ends up being sort of a combination of different things. But that was a good frame of reference to um, think of it in that way. Mezzo soprano clef or soprano clef or something like that. Yeah.
I remember I don't know if I should even reveal this. I almost failed my master's comps because when I did my master's at Cincinnati with Marie, she put down a page from Bruckner 7 and she said, "What is this?" I said, "Oh, it's Bruckner 7." She said, "What key is it in?" I said, "E major." And the theory guy on the faculty said, "What clef would you play that in?" And I was like, treble, because I learned to
Yeah.
transpose the interval. And he said, "Well, how many clefs are there?" I was like, "I don't know, four."
Yeah.
He's like, "Wait outside." And Marie had to sit there and say, "This is not how everybody does it."
That's
And
correct.
you know, but that's great. I mean, after a while, you don't really think about it, right? You just automatically do it. So yeah. So it sounds like you were set up pretty well to go into school, and then you wound up going to University of Michigan to study with Armando Gatala. Why don't you, for some people who we were just talking about this, who are a little younger than us, um, I think it's easy for guys our age. We're now in our 40s to kind of take for granted everybody still knows who our heroes were as when we were younger.
Yeah.
Kind of talk about Mr. Gatala in his terms of his career, but then also about what it was like to study with him.
One of the things about Mr. Gatala that made the first impression on me was when I had a friend whose father happened to be on the faculty of University of Michigan in another department, not music at all. And we had met at a summer music camp in high school. And so she said, if you're thinking about coming here, maybe it's possible we could reach out to Professor Gatala and get a lesson. So I mentioned it to my high school teacher, and he was like, the Armando Gatala? Really? You have to go do this. You have to go do this. His reaction alone, certainly I knew who he was. He had mentioned him before, but his reaction alone told me this was something super significant. And when you had a chance to meet Mr. Gatala in person, what a gentleman he really was, and what kind of impression he made on you, just the way he came across, the way he spoke, the way he carried himself. And I only got the chance to study with him for 1 year at Michigan before he retired. But when you go there, you have a chance to sit in the room with the man who really did affect all of trumpet playing and the orchestra industry and solo trumpet playing, really helping it go in a different direction, really having influenced everybody. That not many players you can say in history who had that kind of influence, who had that kind of landmark significance for the industry for as trumpet players. Um, Typically, when I think about Mr. Gattal, I think more about what a superlative musician he was. And sometimes you think about trumpet players that way, and sometimes you're more impressed with the trumpety things they can do. And his trumpety things were certainly as impressive as everybody else's. But the lasting impression he left on me was just his superlative musicianship. And and like I said, it's disappointing to think I only got to study in person with him for 1 year. But the other thing that was very significant about him was the family atmosphere at Michigan. The other players who were there who had studied with him for a long time. they are still my heroes, to this day. People like, Chris Harr and John Marciando and Darren Kelly and Chris Buboltz and all these other people who knew him, and just really, really fine musicians, all of them, really wonderful trumpet players. And so they would get together and invite me to come along and listen to the recordings. Did you know there was this recording of him playing first trumpet on Pines of Rome? Listen to the way this offstage solo sounds. Listen to this Poem of Ecstasy recording. Listen to this recording of the Debussy nocturnes. Just and so it was nice to be part of that cadre of musicians who had studied with him also, and could really speak to what kind of a person he was. So very, very significant trumpet player in music history, I think.
What talk about the materials he would use? Because I know he was creative with certain things like the sheets and things.
He was. Yes, we did. We also did a lot of transposition with him. He had exercises where he would, you'd start playing in one key and then it would shift to a different transposition, maybe 5 or 6 times, and on one piece of paper you were looking at. I have a Caffarelli book, at his suggestion, and I have we used to work out of the Vizzuti technique studies, all 3 volumes of those. I still have the page-long list of assignments out of the Arbenz book that he would assign. Schlossberg, Bousquet, things like that. We did an embouchure change that one year that I studied with him. So we didn't probably get into as much of the books, the materials that you're talking about. I suspect it would have been many more of those books that from that ilk, or that collection of materials. But then we worked a lot on embouchure at a certain point. So.
Well, what spurred the embouchure change? What was the situation?
I think he was hearing in my playing that he appreciated the technique that I had. He was very impressed about how well prepared I was, from my high school lessons and everything. He appreciated that I could transpose well and things. But he was finding out through some assignments that I had some limitations, that I could play well up to a certain point, but he was worried that they might not go on beyond that and have the success that my work ethic might allow me to have. So he suggested that there may be a slightly more efficient way to play. My high school teacher had attempted also earlier to put me through an embouchure change. At a certain point, it got to be too difficult, and he started to wonder, I think, is this worth continuing or not? Ultimately, what ended up happening with Mr. Gurtala was the continuation of that embouchure change I had attempted in high school. Many years later, when I got into the band, I experimented with other techniques, the buzzing book from Jim Thompson and other thing. I think the embouchure that I finally ended up playing with most comfortably was what Mr. Gurtala had intended, So, but I think definitely I'm glad we went through it together. I came out of it a more efficient trumpet player. I came out of it with a richer sound, more full of overtones. And I see exactly why he asked me to do those things.
Yeah. Wow. And then you hey guys had a shift in trumpet teachers when Gurtala retired, and then going into your second year, it was Charlie Duvall, right?
That's correct. Yes.
Yeah.
We were really lucky that Mr. Duvall came to teach at Michigan, and he also just a very superlative musician. When I think about his playing and the way he talks about music and the way he talked about phrasing all the time, I think about musicianship first, and the trumpet playing to serve being a great musician. So I was really fortunate that Charles Duvall came into my life when he did, and we're still in touch. I consider him a friend, and I enjoy talking to him because he is a very thoughtful person, as thoughtful a person as I think I've ever met and may ever meet, and that certainly came across in his teaching. He absolutely cares about his students, and he is as fine a trumpet player as you will ever hear in your life, I think. So very, very wonderful human being, tremendous musician, and just a fantastic, very impressive trumpet player.
Well, can you talk about the kind of shift in the materials and the approach a little bit with
Sure.
when Mr. Duvall came in?
I think that one of the things that made an immediate impression about me was he got me to focus on the sound right away. You know, so the very first lesson I had with him, when I sat down, took out my trumpet, and played something for him, he said, "You know, you have a lot of technique. That's very impressive, but I want you to hear the sound you're making." You know, and to a young trumpet player, you have a little bit of a, well, I've always been told to have a good sound. You know, but I could tell that he was planting a seed in my mind of, you know, your technique will follow the sound that you have in your head. You know, you have to have an opinion about something. You have to have a concept of how you want to sound, or what's going to serve the music the best, the sound, what's the most appropriate sound. You know, your technique, the way you breathe, the way you stack phrases on top of each other, the way you get through a phrase, the way you shape a phrase, those things are all served by the music you have in your head and the concept you have of phrasing. He was the first person to really set a standard for me to follow that, you know. And indeed, years later, I went back to study with Charles Duvall while I was getting my doctoral degree at Catholic University here in the Marine Band. And I was very nervous that first drive up to take a lesson with him, because we hadn't seen each other in a few years. I was glad that he took me on as a student again. And I was happy, like proud of the fact that I got a job, and I couldn't wait to play for him. And I'll be darned if the very first thing out of his mouth at that first lesson again was some of the same things that he had been asking me to do in my undergrad, you know. And so I appreciated him, you know, always returning to those things about listen to the sound you want to make, have a sound in your head, and let everything you do follow that sound in your head, you know.
Yeah. And so how would you say, I mean, those materials you guys use, probably a lot of flow studies, a lot of lyrical studies. How does that translate into your diet of what you do every day now?
We did a lot of flow studies. We did a lot of lyrical playing, and it is still a part of my playing, especially in the things we play in the Marine Band. They're very technique heavy. There is a lot of in and out of the upper register very quickly. There is a lot of articulating. There is the opportunity to play a lot of repeated short notes, which can sometimes interfere with the student's tone production. So to counter that, to get prepared to do those things, like a Sousa march, like a Fillmore march, like some of the things in the wind repertoire, I find myself returning to the things that Mr. Duvall and I talked about frequently, like a lot of lyrical playing, you know, so that I have a flow in my playing, so that I am able to recognize the beauty of the sound, and then it makes it much easier to play all those technique laden things that we end up doing a lot of in the wind repertoire. And there is a very physical component to this side of our job, where we play a lot of really interesting, good band repertoire, and sometimes in settings where you would where you may not have envisioned yourself playing. So I think in those circumstances, those lyrical studies, the lyrical playing, the flow, getting a flow in my playing is a good thing to be set up to do. So that's the sound I'm going into those situations with. That's the kind of approach I'm going into those situations with. So
Yeah. Well, yeah, because I know that when Mr. Vall and I talk, we talk a lot about removing staccatos, you know, how much the staccato note can affect a player. And it seems like, especially when you're talking about very young players, the staccato can send, you know, there's just so much information that is sending, and it
yeah,
often can maybe make a well-intentioned piece of music not so well-intentioned, I guess is how you would say it, you know?
and yeah.
And
For me, that raises an interesting question of the context, you know, and that's another thing that he was really wonderful to have long discussions about, you know, because in the band, you know, let's take Sousa, since you were talking about marches and things for a second, you know, there is a context around the Sousa marches. There is a context, there is an approach to playing cornet, you know, a Sousa march on cornet, and even if you are playing Sousa march on trumpet and everything, so you can consider the context. But, you know, you can also, there could be several legitimate contexts also, right? I mean, there is the time that Sousa was writing the marches in the early 1900s, and what was cornet playing then? What was the pedagogy that was going on? What did a staccato really sound like back then? And there is also the legitimacy of where staccato evolved in the mid 20th century, and where people were also legitimately performing on cornets, but it may have sounded different than when Sousa was writing his music. So that context, the musical context, is very significant discussion. You know, I think sometimes we limit ourselves when we hold a cornet in our hand and we say, I am now playing cornet, and it means sort of general something. But there's well over 100 years of legitimate contexts of cornet playing and legitimate qualities of articulation. So Charlie and I have had a lot of discussions about what you just talked about staccato and where it really does come from, and there being a very specific context. When you play the staccatos in the Arbon's book, what was the context at the time when Arbon was writing those? There is a very vocal approach. I grew up listening to a lot of Maurice Andre. I still have the cassette tapes that my parents bought me as gifts, and then the CDs that I bought to replace the cassette tapes, and now the playlist, on wherever else. And he went to the Paris Conservatory and studied with people who, there's a direct lineage back to Arbon there, and there is a way in which he plays a staccato, which you can hear out of that context of things. I think so.
And we were talking about this too. We were talking about the way it's printed too in the Arbon book, and how
Yes.
And I think I was telling you of some recordings I've heard of Chikowitz where he described. We're talking about Vince Chikowitz now. That if it's not native to your language, it can get a little bit difficult. But the way the French pronounce it is a certain way. And you told me a story that you asked a friend of yours who spoke, was it a friend of yours or a brother-in-law that spoke fluent French? And can you tell that story?
Yeah, my older brother teaches French in a high school up in New Jersey, and he's married to a woman from France. And after I had been having a discussion with a friend of mine at Tanglewood one year who had studied with Mark Gould, and just talking with Gould about how would a French person pronounce these syllables at the beginning of the Arbon's book, I was fascinated. So I called my brother up, and I said, if I show you this first page of the Arbon's book and show you what's printed there, if you had grown up in France and you teach French, how would you pronounce this? And then I said, okay, well, I'm going to pronounce it exactly the way Matthew pronounced it, but I'm also going to say it now. I'm going to pronounce it without the sound. I'm going to say, so I can say tu, 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 but then I can do it on the wind, right? Tu, 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 tu. So I'm not cutting off the wind and everything, but instantly when I tried it that way, I had the qualities in the wind pattern that I was doing, all of the things that Mr. Duvall and I had worked on, so he was, we used a lot of wind patterns. And when I was taking lessons with him, and he had a specific way he wanted us to do it. He said, it has to be like trumpet playing, but if you grow up in New Jersey and you're sometimes not very articulate when you speak, you can say two, and then it could sound like, and then, your tongue can be too low physically and in your throat and everything. And it may have a certain, not as ringing or not as brilliant a quality of sound as what results. So when I did it the way Matthew had suggested it to say it a certain way, when I imitated the sound, just like Charles Duvall would say, when I followed the sound of Matthew pronouncing the note or the articulation, and then I did a wind pattern using that same thing, it had all the qualities that he had invited me to use earlier in our lessons. So
Yeah. Could you
I
talk
use
about
those all the time now. Go
Could
ahead.
you
I'm
talk
sorry.
about the wind patterns and what those are in case some people don't know? Like, how was that approached?
Sure. So if I grab my trumpet, and I just keep taking one piece of information away, right? Like I can hold my instrument, and then if something is maybe interrupting the flow of the sound, then I can just start taking one piece of information away. I can take the horn away, just play it on the mouthpiece, and then I could take the mouthpiece away and I could buzz my lips, but then I could take my lips away and I could just play it on the wind. So I think the wind pattern is simply that last step about if let's take the opening to Stars and Stripes Forever, right? If you sing the opening of da 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 da, and I play that just on the wind, and so it's like setting up a model for your body to follow. He used to describe it to us like just like a batter would maybe step out of the batter's box in a baseball game and take a couple of practice swings without a ball coming at you, in the high 80s or low 90 miles per hour, without the stress of something coming at you that fast. If you take a step out of the batter's box and simply take a practice swing, when you step back into the batter's box, then you take the same swing. Your body is simply following the model you just set up to follow. And so that the wind pattern becomes that, or for those who are more familiar with a game of golf or something, watching a golfer line up a stressful putt, very frequently they will line up the putt and then take a step back do a practice swing without the pressure of making the putt, and then simply step forward and do exactly the same thing. Indeed, when in some of those circumstances where we have these ceremonies we play in the Marine Band where we might go to a convention in town here and perform something where we might be playing 25 or 30 minutes of marches in a row. There's a tremendous amount of technique laden performance. And sometimes to keep that flow going in my playing, when you're doing those repeated articulations, I might play, some of the music on a wind pattern sort of between times when I might be laying out at a strain or something like that, just to give my body that model to follow, kind of taking that practice swing. So I hope that
Yeah,
is an
no,
easy way.
that's a terrific explanation. I think a lot of times because I sometimes when I work with younger students and I see them do a thing that sometimes the band directors call tizzling. Have you heard of this?
I haven't, no.
It's like wind pattern, but they're doing it for rhythm, and it winds up being this really high sound. And I have to work to get that back into their playing to loosen it up because, and the way you did it, it just sounds really loose and easy. And that's
Yep.
precisely what you said it's for, is to loosen things up. So, and then you went from Michigan to Eastman and stayed with Charlie Geyer. So, can you
Yes.
talk about that a little bit and how that what changes those were?
Well, I think Charlie Geyer had a similar enough approach to Charles Duvall where it didn't feel completely foreign.
Right.
Like the switch from Mr. Gatala to Mr. Duvall, it it didn't feel like foreign, but the tradition from which Mr. Gatala came from was very different than the tradition from which Charles Duvall came from, even though they played in some of the same, like they both played in the Boston Symphony, for example, so that was a neat commonality that they had. But it was sort of like Jim Thompson had explained to us once when he came to audition for the job at Eastman that, if great trumpet playing is at the top of like a mountain, you could climb that mountain from all these different directions. And the people who went to this school describe it this way, and the people who went to this school describe it this way, but you eventually get to that thing at the top.
Right.
And so sometimes we use different language depending on where you come from and who, with whom you studied. And so I think the side of the mountain that both Charlie Geyer and Charlie Duvall came from, they were using similar enough
Right.
language. It didn't feel like a very different thing. For whatever reason, maybe it's just where I was in my trumpet playing. When I think about my time with Charlie Geyer, I think the first word that immediately comes to mind is accountability. So there was a lot of accountability that happened for me when I got to Eastman. And he represented to me a person who was really honest and unblocked, and to say, here is where you think you are, here is where I think you really are, and that's neither good nor bad. And he would say things to me like, I'm sensing a lot of judgment you're kind of imposing on yourself. I am simply saying, here's where I think you are, and here's where you think you are, and here are some suggestions to bridge that gap. And he had very helpful practical suggestions too. And I still had a lot of problems with my piccolo trumpet playing in particular. He showed me a couple of things that he had learned from Arnold Jacobs about potentially I was approaching the piccolo trumpet with too much air that I had sort of locked into my body by closing off this valve at the top of my throat. So he gave me a very simple breathing exercise to fix that, where he would ask me to take a regular breath and then breathe everything out of my body, and then just let my body expand naturally, fill back up again to stasis or zero again. And then he said, now just play a scale, with only that much wind inside your body, rather than taking in the big breath that you take in with the bigger horns, where your body goes into lockdown mode and you feel like you're putting a lot of effort in, but really there's a lot of pressure bumping up against a closed valve. So he was the first person to actually lead me through that process in a lesson where that I could physically understand, not just sort of intellectually be told something, but he would show me, because he would do it alongside me, and it helped me kind of unlock and play much more efficiently, because then those same things translated to the bigger horns too. I discovered through that process that I was playing with too much wind on all of my instruments. And I was remembering all the way back to something that Mr. Gatala used to tell us, to keep our breathing conversation level. Don't
Yeah.
take in too much wind. And then, you just, as if you're having a conversation with somebody, as if you're singing to the audience in the hall. He used to use that phrase, keep your breathing conversation level. I remember that all those years later, going through those exercises with Charlie Geyer, and it really did help all my horns. And again, the listening, he would tell me, go out, pick a trumpet player and go out and find as many recordings of that trumpet player, that one trumpet player, as you can, and fill your brain with that sound. So I had a large collection of recordings for that particular exercise. I determined that I was going to go find as many recordings of Phil Smith as I could, and his playing in the New York Philharmonic, and just fill my brain with that kind of sound and listen to the freedom with which he played, and to see if I could not physically attempt to do something, but simply have that sound in my head when I approach the instrument each time. So that was another very helpful practical suggestion that he gave to me. Just as an aside, at the time that I was studying with Charlie Geyer, my parents were offered the opportunity to live and work in Singapore for 2.5 years. And they were still selling CDs back then. So it was interesting to be able to go visit them in Singapore on the other side of the world. And so that they were on the European release market there. So to go to Tower Records there were a lot of recordings that I found that were not available in the United States. So I was able to find all these great recordings, which now we can all find on Spotify, YouTube, and many, many other places. But, all of a sudden I had all these recordings, that I didn't know existed. It was really fun to discover. So
Are you still a CD listener, or do you do the MP3?
I have MP3s, but I still listen to CDs. I still listen to records. I'll sit down and have the experience of listening to a record all the way through, flipping it over. Yep, I still have cassette tapes and those things also. So yes, I'm still an everything that I have listener.
Yeah, yeah. We're showing our age, but I still listen to all those things too. Um, so speaking of recording, so we talked about Guitarra, Duvall, Geyer. If you were to pick maybe 2 or 3 recordings of each of those guys that stand out in your mind as like a nice model, what would those be?
Well, certainly we've talked about a couple of them with Mr. Gatala. The Poem of Ecstasy recording is just glorious. It's wonderful. The Nocturnes I mentioned. Certainly his recording of the Hummel Concerto. But there's also the Albrechtsberger on there, and a Molter Concerto. His recording of the the Boehm Concerto years later that he did. So those are ones I would go find. But typically when I'm asked about Mr. Gatala and his recordings, I typically search for any recording where he's playing principal trumpet. That's how I usually answer that recording, because he just had a certain way of communicating through the instrument that leaves an impression on you. So I think any recording, he took over playing principal in the Boston Symphony in 1963 when Eric Leinsdorf became the music director, and he left in 1980 to go teach at University of Michigan. And so I used to go to record stores and look for Boston Symphony recordings between those copyright dates, and
Right.
and maybe get lucky about that he was playing principal trumpet. There was an extraordinary recording when he was, so before he took over as playing principal trumpet, he was principal in the Boston Pops when Roger Voisin was playing principal in the orchestra in the Boston Symphony. There's a extraordinary recording he made with the Boston Pops where he plays a lot of opera arias on trumpet. So that's one to go search out too. And it's called Opera Without Words, and so there is a CD version of it that I finally found in college that leaves out all the solo trumpet stuff. So you might end up accidentally finding the one that leaves out some of the brilliant solo playing that he did. But definitely search for Opera Without Words, because it's him playing these gorgeous, luscious opera aria solos, with the Boston Pops, who was basically the Boston Symphony, of course, back in the 50s. Still some of the most impressive musical playing that I go to for inspiration. And certainly the ones with Charles Duvall are a little bit more difficult to find. You have to kind of know somebody who knows those. There's a glorious Janacek Sinfonietta and God Gothic Mass from Montreal Symphony when he was playing principal there. Now that we have YouTube, which wasn't around when I studied with Charles Duvall for my undergrad, you can find recordings from when he was principal in Montreal Symphony for a couple of years. There are a couple things when the Montreal Symphony was on tour in Japan. There are a couple live recordings of him playing like some Bruckner, Scheherazade. So some really gorgeous, beautiful playing. We were talking earlier about there are old recordings of him when he was playing associate principal trumpet in the Boston Pops, of playing principal on some of the old Boston Pops recordings. So you can find those. There's a famous recording of Wynton Marsalis performing the Haydn trumpet concerto with the Boston Pops and John Williams. Charles Duvall is the principal trumpet in the section behind him. So very early when Wynton Marsalis walks out of the stage door, he walks right by Charlie's shoulder. So there's that shot, but then you can find that entire concert on YouTube and hear Charlie playing. We were talking about him playing the Charbrier España overture on cornet with the Boston Pops, just really gorgeous playing. So some of those Boston Pops recordings from 1983 to 1987, early 1987, when he was playing principal on the Pops, those are him playing principal trumpet. Some really gorgeous, luscious playing. He was there when John Williams became the music director of the Boston Pops. So some of those earlier recordings are ones to find. With Charlie Geyer, he played, he joined the Chicago Symphony in the 1960s as fourth trumpet, was eventually moved up to second trumpet. So some of the recordings from that era of the Chicago Symphony brass section are ones you can find with him playing in the section with that section sound. And he was a little bit more difficult to pin down and say, where are you and which ones are you on?
Right.
You can have a pretty good guess that that's where he's playing on some of those recordings. There are some other recordings of him playing with the Eastman Brass when he and Barbara Butler were the trumpet teachers at Eastman, where you can find recordings of those from 1980 to 1998 when they left Eastman. There was Barbara and Charlie playing in the Eastman Brass. There's a fantastic, gorgeous, gorgeous playing of recording of two trumpets and organ they made with an organist named Barbara Harbach. It's difficult to find now because it's out of print, but it's some of the most gorgeous trumpet playing, things arranged for two trumpets and organ by Handel and Bach. A really wonderful recording if you can track that down. So those are a handful.
Yeah. That's great. No, it's always good to know what you idolize, what you think about as an ideal sound from people you've been around, that you studied with. So I have those too with some of my teachers, and especially Marie Speziali. Some of those are always surprising to people because they're like, "That's her." I'm like, "Yeah, that's her bearing the Cincinnati Symphony
Yeah.
with a shovel." Yeah, that's it right there. So I'll get her on here. I'm going to get her on here sometime, and that'll be a different subject. But that's great. And then from there, you won a job in the Marine Band.
That's correct.
Right.
Yeah. After I graduated from Eastman, I moved back to my parents' house in New Jersey for maybe 8 months or so, and I was freelancing in the Pennsylvania, New Jersey area, and was fortunate enough to win my audition. So I started in the Marine Band in January of 1999. So I will retire on the 24th of July after 21 years and a couple of months of service. So.
Wow. So can you talk a little bit about? I guess the number one question was what kind of adjustments did you make once you got in the band, like with your playing and maybe your practice schedule because of the kind of work that you guys are doing, and maybe talk about that a little bit.
Certainly. One thing, since I came in the summer, I won my audition in January, but I arrived here in Washington, D.C. area in June. So the band was in its summer concert rotation. My first performance with the band was on the steps of the Capitol building in a summer concert setting. So it was immediately apparent that you only got like 2 rehearsals before you're out there playing a concert. So,
Wow.
Sometimes you have varying degrees of rehearsal time available to you in school. Sometimes it could be 3 months. Sometimes it could be many, many numbers of rehearsal. And then very, very quickly, I found myself in a situation where you had to be very performance ready to go, showing up to the first rehearsal because there were really only 2 rehearsals. And then sometimes a White House job would come in. So they would cancel the Tuesday rehearsal and you'd have a run through of stuff on Wednesday morning. So the pre-preparation part of it is essential here in the band. And there's the luxury now of having this glorious wealth of history recordings. So you have a pretty good idea of how things went the last time the band played it, or what the last movement of Dvorak's 8th Symphony sounds like. And this wonderful transcription for band, if you've never played that before. So, or if you're new to the band, and you haven't played the band transcription of it as opposed to the orchestra transcription of it or something like that. So so those were things like the speed of my preparation, to answer your question, is something that happened quickly. And in terms of the physical trumpet things too, to just have an awareness of what your capabilities are and to where your readiness skills for those capabilities lie on an anytime basis, because we are available for the needs of the White House and or the Commandant of the Marine Corps at any time. So if somebody calls and they want a brass quintet for a bill signing, or a dance band, for after dinner music, or a chamber orchestra for some event, or a band concert, because they want to have some big announcement about something on the south lawn of the White House. It could be a 4-hour or 5-hour playing commitment that includes, Midway March, John Williams, and the music from E.T., but also a lot of Sousa marches and also a lot of band repertoire. So having a physical readiness, a capability, a preparation, the strength, the more athletic side of what we do, and those are self-driven, self-motivated. So you have your collection of things you want to be able to do on the trumpet, but then knowing that you could be called upon to deliver those things, and you may not know about it too far in advance. So just having the discipline to practice those on a regular basis, when sometimes there may be a week where you're not called upon to do something. So remembering that could happen,
Yeah.
take it out of the case and do it on a regular basis, and then, have some back burner pie in the sky projects that you're constantly working on also, things I'd like to be able to play this piece or work on that thing, or, try, always improve. I didn't grow up playing cornet. I had a little bit of experience, very limited, before I got to the band. And so within the first couple of days, somebody hands you a cornet and says, play now at the level of the Marine Band on day 2 when you're there. So reconciling yourself with this instrument now and finding the mechanic, the equipment that's going to help you succeed to be able to communicate the band on that level, and honor the tradition of cornet playing that was going and still goes on in the band here. That's a responsibility. So putting the discipline, the time in to play the cornet, to become familiar with it, to know how you sound on it, to play your etudes on it, go back and play your Clark studies and your Arbin material on the cornet. That is the instrument those two things were written for, right? So what does it sound like to play those articulation studies we were talking about earlier on a cornet as opposed to a trumpet? So
And how
so
much
those are things, yeah. Go
how
ahead.
much
I'm
were
sorry.
you doing percentage wise? Were you doing trumpet versus cornet back and forth?
I think I don't know if I could assign a number, because it really depends on the concert you're playing. In the middle of a concert, we could play, half on one instrument and half on another, but it could literally be as quickly as, we're going to play the end credits from E.T., by John Williams, and then we're going to chase that with the Sousa March. So when we finish playing that, the conductor will turn around and bow to the audience. While that's happening, you have to remember, in the last couple of bars of E.T., get ready to put my trumpet down and pick my cornet, because you have maybe 15 seconds to get ready to go on the next, and your brain has to automatically flip that switch that this is going to operate differently. It's going to immediately feel different than the other instrument that you just played on. So and just having the discipline to be aware of that, so that you don't have to worry about it when you get into and then of course the band takes tours. When I joined the Marine Band in 1999, the tours, which happen every fall, and they still happen at the same time they did when Sousa got permission to take the band on its first tour, they were 7.5 weeks long. So we would leave the band to Washington, D.C. on October 1st and return just before Thanksgiving. And you're in a different place every single night. So the acoustic you're playing in is significantly different every day. So just having that awareness and that skill to let go of how something sounds, and the feedback you're getting, and just operate, having the discipline to just operate like you've been training yourself to do. That's something else I had to learn pretty quickly. The tours are shorter now, but the same rubric applies.
Right.
So
Now, were you what was your equipment like on the cornet to start with? What
what is the,
Yeah,
that's what you're,
what was like your mouthpiece setup, or what were you? Because I know I know that times I've gone to play like a Dennis Wick mouthpiece that's deep, and then go back to my regular Bach mouthpiece. I'm like, this feels like completely opposite ends. How did you compensate for those two, having to switch so much?
an excellent question, because I had a little bit of experience, like I said, very little playing cornet before I came to the band. And I had a Dennis Wick, I think it was a 2B mouthpiece. And so before I got my band purchased mouthpiece, I simply got my Dennis Wick 2B mouthpiece out. I was issued a Bach cornet that we were playing at the time, and I plugged my Dennis Wick, and I thought it was pretty good. I felt like, okay, I can. This is not as foreign as I thought it was going to be. But then when you sit down in the band and start playing, then there are the projection and acoustic is different, and so some continued reconciling occurred at that point. And it's a nice sound to have an awareness of. So like, for example, if you're playing the English folk song suite or one of the whole suites for military band. Having that sound concept in your head is certainly one thing. It didn't quite help me as much when you're having to play something like the George Washington Bridge or some Sousa marches on that mouthpiece. So eventually, when I was taken to get instruments purchased on my behalf, since the Marine Corps is required to provide you equipment to do your job, I simply found a Bach cornet mouthpiece, the similar size to what I was playing on trumpet. So I had a 1B trumpet mouthpiece and a 1B cornet mouthpiece. And then that's what I used on that first tour. And I still have the 1B cornet mouthpiece. It still is my favorite mouthpiece to play. And I felt like the B cup, it honored a little bit more of the V-ish or in that direction of shape. It was deeper than a C cup mouthpiece. So it gave a little bit, it split the difference in my mind between giving a little bit more of a deeper or a different reconciled shape. But I could also keep up with trombones and other instruments and other circumstances. So I had a wider palette or spectrum of colors available to me. Maybe that's a better way to describe that. So
Yeah. And then when you play trumpet, were you playing mostly B flat or mostly C, or were you going back and forth a little bit?
back and forth, yeah, and that's always up to the principal player. I play a lot of C trumpet in the band, in the concert band, and in the orchestra, and a lot of B flat trumpet too. So I would say I play B flat trumpet and C trumpet and B flat cornet the most. The B flat cornet is a personal choice of mine. We have a really good set of C cornets now. Also, many more players are playing C cornet than they did when I first joined the band. We had Bach cornets when I first got here. I don't remember what the bell was. I am assuming it was a 37 bell on an old Bach cornet. And the instruments were getting worn out after a lot of use. And so we had a search early on in my career here. So by my second year in the band, we had purchased a set of Getz and Eterna cornets. So that's what we still play. I still have my Getz and Eterna cornet from 2000. There is some talk about maybe starting to try something else out, so that instrument, the Getz and Eterna cornet, I have it right here. It's a very, very different shape than the Bach cornet I was playing. This has the shepherd's crook that the Bach cornet I didn't have, the one what I was
Right.
playing. And we like the Getz and cornets. We feel like they did offer us a variety of colors. It had all the things the Bach cornet could give to us, but then it offered us more in the direction of like the Holst and the Vaughan Williams and that side of things. It was easier to get more of those colors on this instrument. It's not like we couldn't on the other one. It's just easier on this instrument. So that's how I would describe that.
Kind of a British brass band sound, you might say.
It's possible, right? People have their own opinion about that, for sure on this instrument also. But compared to what was happening, and of course, it's I don't want to be unfair to those other instruments because they had been used for a really, really long time. The taxpayers definitely got their superlative use out of those other instruments when I got here, and so it was time to upgrade them. So these Getz and cornets were a newer instrument also. So simply having a newer instrument made a big difference in the ease of playing. So for whatever that's worth.
Yeah. And playing cornet is not something that I see young students do now at all. It's not, you see old pictures, but certainly not when I was in school, and it doesn't sound like you grew up doing it either, but it's very good I think it's good for your trumpet playing to know how to do it. I think one helps the other, right? So
I can tell you at this end of my career, playing as much cornet as we played in the band has really helped my tone production in trumpet playing a lot. And it's helped my efficiency. We were talking about articulation before. It's improved my articulation. I feel like a much more efficient, a much more free trumpet player. I tend to force the sound less on trumpet when I've been playing cornet or having that balance in my playing. I've started even experimenting with playing certain things just as a practice tool occasionally, and even some orchestral excerpts. Just trying it. I purchased a Mount Vernon era Bach cornet a while back, B flat cornet, and even just having that. Sometimes when I find myself like getting stuck at a certain point and looking for another thing, and I use my buzz aid. I buzz on my mouthpiece occasionally just as a tool. And sometimes I'll pick my cornet up and play it on that. For whatever reason, the tone production becomes easy. When I go back to the trumpet, it's a one-to-one translation, and it helps me. So I use that occasionally.
So 21 years in the band is quite a while. I'm sure you've had some interesting experiences,
Mm-hmm.
right? Do you have any like stories that come up that you would want to tell people off the top of your head?
I think it's a unique circumstance as a trumpet player. that you would find yourself around. Um, I didn't envision growing up in rural New Jersey that I would find myself face to face with the President of the United States. And by that, I mean like him alone on one side of the carpet and the five people in the brass quintet on the other side of the carpet. And it was simply him looking at us, looking at him. We were waiting to sound honors where he was going to walk into the room. My younger brother was in the Marine Band with me for 11 years, and we went over in the George W. Bush administration to play honors, which is four ruffles and flourishes, followed by the announcement of the President of the United States, and then hail to the chief. And so he was a family was receiving the Medal of Honor, posthumously receiving the Medal of Honor for someone who had passed away, and so President Bush met with the family in the Blue Room, and then when it became time for the event to start, the family was escorted to their seats, and he had just met with this family who had lost their loved one, and so then they opened the doors. They were getting people seated finally, so it was just the five of us lined up on one side of the carpet and him lined up on the other side of the carpet, just waiting for the cue that we're ready to go now. And so he looked up and saw us there and had a little bit of an interaction with us, and he knew he wasn't on camera, and it was a nice, relaxed moment, very respectful, and I think he was glad to have a little bit of stress release temporarily before continuing with this somber occasion. So that was a unique circumstance to think that we had sort of unique access to the president at one point, just as a musician.
Right.
I remember thinking too, the last state dinner I played was for the president of France, and his wife came to visit, and really thinking at that point that we are representing our country right now. The president of France and his wife are about to walk in the front door of the White House, and the first thing they're going to hear is this orchestra. So we are representing our country. We are providing an atmosphere where something legitimate is happening. So those things stick with you. The first time you sound taps at Arlington Cemetery, either by yourself or with the band, and you see the effect that moment has on a family who is grieving. That's something that will never leave you, and it makes it a very big impression about those things that we were talking about earlier. Your readiness skills. Am I doing this ceremony? Am I prepared enough to offer the appropriate amount of music, level to this very important event that's happening?
Right.
And that's something I remember when I, consider my preparation, getting, in those times when I'm not assigned as many jobs. The sight of veterans coming to band concerts in places that I never thought I would perform a concert, in wheelchairs and using walkers and things like that, when they hear their service song played at the end of a band concert, and knowing that you came from Washington, D.C., you are the same people who play for the President of the United States and visiting dignitaries and things, and you came to their town and they were helped into this concert, but they hear their service song and they have to stand up, and sometimes they have to help, they have to be helped out of their wheelchair, but they're going to stand up. That's an impression that will never leave me ever. And I was really honored to have the opportunity to serve that way.
Right.
Just will not forget those things. So
Yeah, and wow, that's quite an answer. And then you had, and then like we talked about before, you had some interaction with John Williams a little bit too.
yes, so very special. The first time John Williams came to Connect the Marine Band was early in my career, and I was really lucky to be included in that concert at the Kennedy Center, and to all of a sudden be standing in front of the person who had composed the music to some of my favorite films, and to be part of an event where he was experiencing his music in a unique way. That was a special moment, because these were brand new transcriptions for concert band that his staff had helped realize, and even he didn't know until he came to the Marine Barracks to rehearse with us what that was going to sound like. And to be in the room for that moment was very special. And he is a really wonderful, warm, thankful, welcoming person. And then a couple of years later, for him to have written a piece for us, and which we've had a chance to perform a lot, that was also a very special event. So just a chance to work with him and some other conductors, Ozma Vanska, Leonard Slatkin, George Schwartz, amongst others. So those were very significant musical moments for me.
Yeah.
So
I'm gonna guess your photo album has some pretty interesting pictures in it from times here and there, right?
Yeah, I can. I was when at the end of the Obama administration, he wanted a chance to say thank you and goodbye to the Marine Band, and so we were invited to go have a moment at the White House, where at the end of the event, he stood and shook everybody's hand in the United States Marine Band, which the President of the United States is a very very busy position, and that he wanted that to happen was very significant. To say thank you to us. That
Wow.
also made a very big impression on me.
Wow.
So yeah.
Well, and I've always heard that each president has sort of their own time schedule, shall you say? Like, was it true Clinton was a little bit later? Bush was always on time. I would something like that.
I think some of that depends on what's going on in the world. I think, because the things happen so quickly at the White House because of whatever's happening in the world, and then the response to that, then they can really speed up or slow down events. We aren't really told sometimes why events happen at certain paces or whatever, but we also don't know an important meeting that could be called up, that where the president is now required, where he or she had intended to start at a certain time, but then they're asked their opinion about something, or they have to make a decision about something very significant. So again, having the discipline to just be ready to play whenever it starts, and or even early, because it's not about um, it is about being there for the event when it's the appropriate time, and the appropriate time is when the White House is done dealing with the other very significant things that are also happening. So yes, I don't typically, I was not informed of the reasons why certain things happened. It did happen differently, but that could have been for a variety of reasons. So I guess that's how I answer that. Yeah.
Right. No, that's good. That's a fine answer. So, um, oh man, I just had a question right on the tip of my tongue. Oh, I know. And obviously, you've had a lot of great colleagues in the trumpet section during that time.
Yes.
Some people who have gone on some pretty prominent roles in other places. You want to talk about some of these people a little bit?
Sure, absolutely. I'm grateful to every trumpet player I performed in the band with. I learned something from literally everybody. I continue on a daily basis. I'm so blessed to hear everybody in our section, and what an honor to be able to sit on stage with people, and the people who I get to hear on a regular basis. So yes, I was honored to serve in the band when Tom Hooten and Jen Murata were in the band, and Chris Smith was in the band, and we performed in the brass quintet a lot together, and Jeff Strong for sure, and Taga Larson was in the band when I was in the band, and but everybody I work with, I could name all 19 trumpet players currently in the band, and I'm grateful to be able to hear every one of them on a daily basis. Even people who left the band and decided to do something else. Joel Williams is an attorney now who lives in Ohio, lives and works in Ohio. Tremendous trumpet player, really warm, generous individual, and yeah, so very very grateful to everybody. Certainly, you could talk about our current players. Matt Harding is our incredible, legendary current solo cornet player. Kirk Dupuis, our just brilliant principal trumpet player. Um, but everybody, Amy McKay, Brandon Eubank, Brad Weil. I shouldn't start. Susan Ryder. I could go on for years. Just what an extraordinary influence listening to her and working with her as a human being has been on my playing. I'd just be really thankful to all these people, because I could go on about all of them, for hours.
Yeah, because
So
anytime I've interacted with any of you guys, I mean, of course, I've known Susan for a long time, and some of those other guys too, and it's always seemed like a super healthy vibe in the section, a very supportive group of people, you know. And given the task that you guys have, that's that's very helpful, I would imagine, right? Because things come up, and you know, you're playing off of each other's strengths and trying to make everybody so successful. It's such a probably even more than even a great orchestra section. You have to really depend on that camaraderie and that kind of esprit de corps to kind of get the job done. A lot of times, I would imagine.
absolutely, yeah. You touched on it a little bit earlier about there are a lot of circumstances where we find ourselves, and things happen. You could be at the White House, and the job itself could take 3 or 4 hours, but it may be delayed by an hour or 2 hours. So now you're waiting around for 2 or 3 hours, and I can't think of a finer group of people to be waiting around with. Where you don't even know the past because people are so supportive. And yes, life circumstances happen, and things happen in your playing, or you're at the White House and the job is long, it's intense, the heat is the personal weather circumstances could be whatever they are, and people jump in, they do whatever they can to help. it's a very supportive, very collegial atmosphere, and that's I'm gonna miss that on a day-to-day basis. But I'm faithful, like my friends, like Tom and Jen and Chris and all those Jeff and all those other guys who have left the band. I am faithful that we have good relationships, that we are still in touch with each other. We still check in, and so I'm glad that the hope will not disappear from my life, So that's a nice thing to think. I'm looking forward to still being in touch with all of them. So.
Right, right. And now you're making a big move to go start teaching at Cincinnati. Talk about that a little bit and how exciting that is, and kind of what a different chapter that is.
It's thrilling. It's a big honor, to replace Professor Siebert, and congratulations to him on his retirement after a really great career there, and just the legacy of great things that are happening at such a great school there. I was delighted to the last time I talked to Professor Siebert to learn that people like Herman Belstead and Frank Simon and were teachers there also at one point, and Marie Speziali and Phil Collins, and just it's thrilling to think that there are such wonderful things happening in Cincinnati. I enjoyed being on campus and looking around the city, and to get to hear a little of a concert that was happening, and of course, knowing that many of my current colleagues in the band went to Cincinnati, and what superlative players they are, what wonderful human beings they are, how they talk about their time in Cincinnati, wonderful food in the area to go eat, but also what a challenging, great place to grow as a musician it was to study. So I am really looking forward to the entire experience.
Yeah, both the Skyline chili and the Grater's ice cream, I believe, are the
Yes,
delicacies.
both been mentioned for sure.
I imagine so. Great, and based and you're in kind of a unique position because you have a lot of orchestral experience too that you've done in addition to the band, and there is orchestral playing in the band as well, right?
Yeah. We have 23 string players in the band, and it was for a long time in the band, certainly way before I got in the band, you had to double on a string instrument and a wind instrument. So they changed that rule sometime in the mid 20th century, and so now we have this incredible orchestra, just really really fine players. So if you didn't know the band had string players, definitely go to the band's YouTube channel and check them out on social media. It's a glorious orchestra, and I'm again going to miss working with them, but I'm really looking forward to continuing to hear them on the social media, because they're really wonderful human beings. They have a
Well,
hard job, really hard job.
and what I was thinking about is like the uniqueness of your background and how that'll be able to translate into students, because a lot of us study with somebody who played in an orchestra predominantly, or maybe somebody that played in a brass quintet predominantly, but you really did chamber music, wind band music, orchestral music, plus playing. You did a lot of freelancing in the Washington area, like National Symphony and some places like that. So you really are drawing a really wide palette and can give those students something to uh, to do things correctly. I know you and I were talking a few weeks ago about Sousa marches and how you know people can go through an entire undergraduate degree and not play a Sousa march.
I've heard it's a thing, and I think but they exist. They're part of our professional experience, and wherever you find yourself after school. So it is the band is recording all of Sousa's marches right now, so you have a model to follow now, which is wonderful. And but you have the opportunity to check in with the history behind each march. Each one of those marches was written for a very specific purpose. There's a story behind it, and that's as much interesting to me as the music is wonderful about it. So it's also interesting to just hear how the writing did evolve over a period of time. I think a lot like studying Clark cornet solos. Most people don't know that Sousa wrote 150 marches, and the marches were only a small output of his entire content as a composer. There are operettas, there are many songs that he wrote, and people don't know about the vast majority of his music. Just like the people grow up typically playing 2 or 3 or 4 maybe Clark cornet solos, but he wrote maybe as many as 50. And we don't know about those other ones typically because maybe they didn't get published, or they didn't get published in this, that, or the other book, or the publishing company went out of business or something like that. So particularly some of his later solos are quite interesting. So they're worth exploring, just like the Sousa music.
Wow.
So if you're curious about Sousa, if you find yourself, like you mentioned that there are some times where you find yourself not in a place to perform a Sousa march, the band is recording them all right now, but you can download your part, whatever part you want, from the band's website and have it, and you have Colonel Fettig's remarks and notes about it. You can learn the music, if you're curious about those marches. So that's a place you can go. That's a source you can go look for the material now.
Wow. So it's like such a encyclopedia, I mean, such a library there that the Marine Band has done in your time there, and you've really been there too in a time when like a lot of the recording technology has changed, or when just the way those things are done, and I mean now we have the internet and there's so much visual that you can get that you couldn't get before. So it's fantastic. Um,
Mhm.
and I guess I was going to say, is there, could you just maybe talk a little bit about now that you're phasing out of the band and you kind of have can set your own goals and things? Do you have any upcoming projects, or or even talk about what your day to day playing life is like now that you maybe are on your own, so to speak, for the first time in a couple of decades?
Yeah, I think again, like so I have one more thing that I'm going to do with the band performance-wise. So right now I have something immediate to get ready for that includes the BAME Sextet and a few other things on a program that'll be broadcast sometime later in July. But then beyond that, like you mentioned, like I won't have these band assignments coming to me. So what are my projects? Like you mentioned, where do I consider myself on my journey studying Charlier, on my journey learning the Biche Etude book? I'm constantly revisiting Arbans, and discovering new things. I mentioned those other solos. There's that book that got published by Carl Fisher years ago that Mike Sachs wrote a really wonderful introduction for, of about 30 or 32 cornet solos by Herbert L. Clark. And I didn't know almost all of them, because I only knew what was published in the back of my Herbert L. Clark characteristic studies book when I was growing up. So I only knew a couple of, and there was maybe 12 in that book, and I only knew about 4 of those 12. And so here's all this book of 32 solos. Sometimes it's fun to learn that new repertoire and to say how do I want to exist as a trumpet player? Going back to what I talked about with Charles Duvall in those lessons years ago about how do you want to sound, your brand. I was speaking to some of those students at Cincinnati recently about what's going to happen in the fall, which is still getting worked out, whether things go in person or distanced, or whether they start way and move to another, and just offering them to look at this as an opportunity to work on who they want to be. What is your brand as a trumpet player? What do you want to say as an artist? What is that sound in your head? And how do you want to sound playing this excerpt on this solo? And what do you want to say about Charlier? What do you want to say about Arbans? What do you want to say about Sousa and other things, Clark? So those are opportunities to learn and continue growing. So those are the things that I'm doing right now. I'm revisiting things that I've known before. I'm looking for new etude books. I'm working my way through Phil Collins' brand new book that just came out. Just a really beautiful, wonderful collection of etudes. About a year or two ago, I took a jazz arranging course. And so that's another thing that I'm working on, growing as a musician, making arrangements and thinking about music in this new way now. And that I was challenged to think about. So that's been a really wonderful, interesting way to grow, So those are the things I'm doing right now.
Wow. Well, it's like you've had a great career, and now it's like the next phase of it. But we'll still be hearing you play a lot, and look forward to hearing how things go at Cincinnati. And thanks everybody that tuned in. I kind of did a little bit different format this time because I'm not very good with going back and forth. So I think from now on I'll invite people to ask questions. We did have some questions from Chris Bubel. So Chris, I know you're watching, and I think I asked your questions during the interview. And if I didn't, well, too bad. But so, but hopefully some people are watching and that are friends of ours, and hopefully some of this was informative, especially if there's like some band directors that are watching and they're getting a perspective from somebody that's right in the Marine Band and has you've definitely seen and done a lot of things in 21 years. So it's awesome to hear about those things. But well, look, thanks so much, and really appreciate you coming in. And I hope I see you soon and in person.
I hope so too. Yeah, thanks for having me. I really enjoyed being here,
Yeah.
and I've appreciated your classes too. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Michael. Great to see you. Take care.
Okay, bye everybody.
Bye bye.